The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of the Henderson estate. Richard Henderson sat in his black sedan outside the wrought iron gates of his own home, checking his phone one last time before heading inside. The business meeting in Chicago had ended 3 hours earlier than expected, and for once, he was grateful for the efficiency of his legal team. Richard had built his fortune in commercial real estate, turning small properties into sprawling developments across the Midwest. At 42, he owned more buildings than he could count and employed hundreds of people. But none of that seemed to matter much anymore. Not since the accident 6 months ago that had changed everything for his daughter Emma. The gates opened with their familiar electronic hum, and Richard drove slowly up the circular driveway. His house stood like a monument to success. 3 stories of pristine white stone, perfectly trimmed hedges, and flowering gardens that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. It was impressive, certainly, but it had never felt much like a home. Especially not lately. As he approached the front entrance, Richard noticed something unusual. Instead of the quiet stillness that typically greeted him, he could hear voices coming from somewhere on the grounds. Laughter. Actually, when was the last time he had heard laughter at his house? Richard parked and stepped out of his car, following the sound around toward the side garden. What he saw there stopped him in his tracks. His 16-year-old daughter Emma was sitting on a stone bench near the rose garden, her leg cast stretched out in front of her. She was wearing a sunny yellow dress that his housekeeper Mrs. Patterson must have picked out. Emma rarely bothered with colors anymore. But what truly surprised him was that she was smiling. Actually smiling. For what felt like the first time since the skiing accident that had shattered her left leg in 3 places. Kneeling beside her was Marcus Chen, the evening janitor who came to clean Richard's office building downtown. Richard recognized him immediately, a quiet, hard-working man in his 30s who always nodded politely when they passed in the hallways. But what was he doing here, at Richard's house, talking to Emma? Richard moved closer, staying behind the cover of a large oak tree so he could observe without being seen. He wanted to understand what was happening before he intervened. See how the roots spread out like that? Marcus was saying, pointing to a small potted plant he held in his hands. That's how they find the nutrients they need to grow strong again. Even when the plant gets damaged, those roots keep reaching out, keep trying. Emma leaned forward on her crutches, genuinely interested. But what if the damage is too much? What if it can't grow back the way it was before? Marcus considered this thoughtfully. Well, sometimes plants don't grow back exactly the same way. Sometimes they grow back different. But different doesn't mean worse, you know. Sometimes different means stronger. Richard felt his breath catch in his throat. Emma had been asking these kinds of questions for months. About healing, about recovery, about whether she would ever be the same athlete she had been before the accident. The doctors had been honest. Her leg would heal, but competitive skiing was probably over. Her dreams of the Olympic team had ended on that mountain in Colorado. Richard had hired the best therapists money could buy, sent her to the finest rehabilitation centers, bought every piece of equipment the doctors recommended. But here was this janitor, this man who cleaned office buildings for a living, somehow reaching his daughter in a way that none of the expensive specialists had managed to do. My dad keeps telling me everything will be fine, Emma said quietly. But I know it won't be the same. I know I'll never ski competitively again. Your dad sounds like he loves you very much, Marcus replied gently. Sometimes when people love us, they want to fix everything for us. But some things can't be fixed the old way. They have to be grown into something new. Richard shifted his weight slightly, and a twig snapped under his foot. Both Emma and Marcus looked up, spotting him immediately. Richard felt heat rise in his cheeks, embarrassed at being caught eavesdropping. "Dad," Emma called out, her smile fading slightly. "You're home early." Richard stepped forward, unsure how to explain his presence or his prolonged observation. "I was." The meeting ended sooner than expected. He looked at Marcus, who had stood up respectfully. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. How do you two know each other?" Marcus glanced at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Henderson, I hope you don't mind. I've been helping your daughter with a gardening project." Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Emma was interested in plants, and since I have a small landscaping business on the weekends. He's been teaching me about root systems, Emma added quickly. And how plants recover from damage. It's actually really interesting, Dad. Richard looked between them, still trying to process the scene. But how did you? I mean, when did this start? Emma's expression grew slightly defiant. Mrs. Patterson arranged it. She thought it might help me get outside more. Marcus has been coming by twice a week for the past month, teaching me about the gardens. Did you know we have 17 different species of roses? And that the oak tree by the pool is over 100 years old? A month. His daughter had been engaging with someone, learning something, showing genuine interest in the world around her, and Richard had been completely unaware. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I should probably go, Marcus said quietly, sensing the tension. Emma, we can continue the lesson next week if your father approves. No, wait, Richard said, surprising himself with the urgency in his voice. Please. I'd like to understand what you've been teaching her. Marcus looked uncertain, but Emma's face lit up. Really, Dad, you want to learn about the gardens? Richard realized that in all his years of paying people to maintain his property, he had never once taken the time to understand what they were actually growing. He nodded, moving closer to where they sat. For the next hour, Marcus patiently explained the principles of plant recovery and growth. He showed Richard how the climbing roses had been pruned back severely the previous spring but had returned stronger than ever. He pointed out where new shoots were emerging from seemingly damaged areas of various plants. But more than that, Richard watched his daughter. He saw how she listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and even laughed at Marcus's gentle jokes about stubborn perennials. This was the most animated he had seen Emma since the accident. As the sun began to set, Marcus gathered his tools. Thank you for letting me share this with you both, he said. Emma, remember what we talked about. Growth takes time, but it happens in ways we don't always expect. After Marcus left, Richard and Emma sat together on the bench in comfortable silence. The evening air was warm, filled with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle. I'm sorry I didn't know about the gardening lessons, Richard said finally. Emma shrugged. You've been busy. And I wasn't exactly talking much about anything. That's not an excuse. I should have been paying attention. Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. Do you think, would it be okay if I joined you and Marcus for the next lesson? I'd like to learn too. Emma's smile was soft but genuine. I'd like that, Dad. Richard reached over and took his daughter's hand. For the first time in months, he felt something that had been missing from their large, perfect house. He felt hope growing, taking root in the spaces between them, finding new ways to flourish. The gardens around them seemed to whisper with the promise of tomorrow's growth, and Richard finally understood that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Sometimes healing begins not with expensive treatments or grand gestures, but with simple wisdom shared under an evening sky, where roots run deep and new growth is always possible.